I was asked to do a video about the Daodejing, specifically about the first verse of the Daodejing. So today we're going to talk about it. And the first verse, that is something. It's probably the most complicated verse from the whole of the Daodejing. So if you're interested in the Daodejing, you should definitely watch this video all the way to the end. I will talk with you also about, of course, this verse and its place in the Daodejing as a whole, and what the Daodejing actually is for, what it is actually describing, because it is not as easy as you think. And Daodejing falls apart in three ideas: Dao, De, and Jing. And we have to discuss all three of them, but also we have to discuss them as subsets, because Dao and De together, they are one word, and they indicate basically the idea of morality. How are you in your life? Are you being a moral person or are you not? If you are a moral person, then you have a good feel for the pulse of life and the pulse of reality, and as a result of that you will be able to adjust to the reality as it is. This is called Wei. At the moment when you are not having this morality, then at that moment you go against the Tao, so to say, and we will get back to Tao and De and as a meaning in that sense. The nice thing about the concept of Jing is that it is very often translated as classic, but the word for Jing actually is an indication of weft made by fibers. It is also a little bit of an indication of underground currents, and therefore indicates a text, because it is about a text that is referring to the way how ideas are woven together to describe reality. And this is also where it becomes a little bit paradoxical, because we're talking here about Tao and De. From Tao, everybody always says Tao cannot be described. Like I said in the other part of the text, the whole Daodejing is difficult to describe, as Master Zhang said. Okay, but then when we look at this Jing part, it means that the Daodejing has as a function to explain reality. And as I said before, if you start from the back and you go to the front, then gradually you come to a deeper understanding than when you start from the front and then you go to the back. Of course, when you start at the front, you are confronted with the most complicated concepts, and then gradually when you go to the back, it feels like you're mastering the topic, because it becomes easier. You think like, oh no, I've got some more things. The reality is, when you go from the back to the front, you actually start to be educated from the ground up all the way until you have that enlightening moment where you can understand the Tao. De, on the other hand, is part of Tao, part of morality, and it has to do with the fact that everything is born with intrinsic qualities. These intrinsic qualities, which are in the West very often called virtue, in the Christian sense, these qualities, which are very often translated in Western language in the form of virtues, which is a Christian concept, we are actually here talking about inherent quality of things, like how a metal kettle has particular kind of quality of transferring heat, so that the water inside can cook. The vase can store things, and it has an exit and an entrance. If it doesn't have an exit and an entrance, then it becomes like a globe, right? And it might be hollow or not hollow. That doesn't really matter that much. That's also why fake golden objects for feng shui are very useful, because they're very light and they're not massively gold, but they give the experience when you're viewing it as massively gold. The psychology of understanding De is therefore very important. When you talk about the combination of Tao and De, you see that Tao is the way how the intrinsic quality of things actually works. So your behavior has a particular kind of intrinsic quality, and therefore it will work in a particular kind of way. So when in the Daodejing, the Tao, Ge Tao, Fei Cang Tao, the Tao that Taos, is the superlative of Tao, so to say, or the better Tao, or the special Tao, then at that moment you can say, ooh, this is very different from the Tao that can be spoken of is not a real Tao, because that is actually not what it is saying. The secret of Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao is primarily inside the structure of the characters as a whole. Dao Ke Dao, Dao Ke Dao means that the Dao is both a verb and a noun. So the first Dao is a noun and the second one is a verb. The Dao Ke Dao, the Dao that Daos. So that means the Dao that's basically itself, right? So the Dao that is representing itself. And then we talk about Fei Chang. Fei Chang is a little bit of a complicated word because nowadays it is used as a superlative. Like 这个是非常好, this is very good, right? But that is not exactly what is the meaning here. It actually is two different kind of characters, and the first character, Fei, is actually that of a bird spreading its wings. And at the moment when we go talk about Chang, we talk about a skirt that is being lifted up. And this is where it becomes very interesting. So the original meaning Fei Chang, when you look at it from the perspective of exercise, at the moment when you take it from the perspective of exercise, then at that moment you can say, okay, Fei, and then you see that your skirt is being lifted up. So as a result of that, that was this underneath can be seen, right? So at the moment when you say Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao. So this exercise actually represents, in that sense, the meaning of Fei Chang. So when you talk about Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao, we talk about the Dao that Daos is actually revealing a secret. So is amazing Dao, right? As a result of that, it is nothing like the Dao that can be talked about. It's not a real Dao. Even though in the Daodejing further down the road, it is being talked about that there are Daos that you can talk about. Confucianism talked about Taoism all the time. And also Buddhism talked about Taoism all the time, talked about Tao all the time. And as a result of that, there are different kind of meanings for Tao. The original meaning of Tao, in that sense, is comparable to walking through the hills. And the hills on both sides of the track where you're walking, there are bushes and you can see the sun shining to it. The sun, the character for sun, is also the character for self. Right? So through the complications of your daily life, you can also see your own self through the complications of the daily life. And there we come back to the de, because the de is the inherent quality of your actions. And that is the sun from the self shining through your actions. So if you walk your talk, that is basically Tao, right? And if you are also therefore seeing this in the context of the explanation, that means that if the Daodejing says this is basically the function of the Daodejing, namely to learn to become a sage and to be able to travel between the different realms, then at that moment you can say, okay, so this is then the meaning. Then when we are looking from the perspective of the second sentence, namely Ming Ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming, then you come to the same conundrum, because here also Ming means both destiny and name. Name and destiny are the same. So the name that you are having, your birth name, is also basically a description of your destiny within that sense. And in Chinese culture, of course, your name or the name for things was specifically selected to manifest what you want to do with it. So if you have a particular favorite object, you would give it a name. When you want to have a particular kind of career, you would take a particular kind of name. Like my monk name is Liu, and Liu is the name given by my Sifu. And he at that moment, because he gives me that name, gives me an assignment. So this is what your name is all about. Therefore it is important to not just have a name, but to have a meaningful name. So when you look about the name Ming Ke Ming, Fei Chang Ming, that means that the name that is actually naming, that means that the inherent virtue, the inherent quality of the name comes out. Then at that moment, this one is like the bird spreading its wing, lifting up its feathers or its skirt, and therefore revealing what is under it. The second sentence and the first sentence, they form a unity. So there is the name and the destiny, and there is the inherent quality and the morality of a person, basically revealing the unity of things, namely that because of following your destiny, because of having the right kind of morality, representing your inherent qualities, then at that moment you reveal your inner nature, and therefore you become, a little bit more than anybody else who is not doing that. The third sentence, on the other hand, shows that the origin of things is without a name. And at that moment, when they are without a name, they still represent heaven and earth. And heaven and earth are two of your four parents. You have your father and your mother biologically. And depending on their karma, on the way how they conceived you, they will have an influence on how you are as a person, if you're healthy or not healthy. But from before that time, heaven and earth are your origin, so they are your parents too. The next sentence I always find most fascinating, because it says basically having a name is the beginning of the Yuan Dongxi. And in Chinese, Yuan is 10 and 4, 1 and 4 zeros, and 1 is the symbol of life unity, and 4 is the symbol of death, because Si sounds like Si, and that is death, right? So 4 zeros is 4 times nothing, is the number of death, while number 1 is the number of existence, of being, right? So this is talking about at the moment when the name is revealed, that means that there is the difference known between being and non-being, right? So this is basically what this sentence refers to. And it means that if you understand the destiny enveloped in your name, then at that moment you automatically have existence. So before you have a name, you don't have an existence. In regard to ideas about birth, and about the rights for being, abortion and so on, you could deduce from that in Taoism you only become a being at the moment when you become one, so that when you are given a name, if at the moment of conception you get a name, then that is the moment where you are a being. But it means also that you have to be separate from your parents. So from the moment when you're separate from your parents and you receive your name, from the 1 comes the 2, right? Then at that moment comes 3, and this is later on in the Daodejing described as the gateway to the Yuan Dongxi also. And that means that from having existence and having a name comes the access to the 10,000 things, what we call the 10,000 things. So our Western numeral translation of Yuan Dongxi is wrong. That is also very important to realize at the moment when you listen to that text. And I think most Chinese teachers have no idea about the fact that we read that as a number, while they read it as a symbol. One of the things that Taoism always talks about is about continuity of life in immortality. And in the next sentence, it actually talks about this. And it says, if you can constantly be without desires, that means that you do not invalidate your Ming, right? Because this is what it comes about. Then at that moment, you also have the opportunity to observe the things as they are. And as a result of observing as they are, you can actually come much further with things. It actually says that when you are contemplating things as they are, you will be revealed the marvels of existence. Because, to be quite frank, life is amazing. The fact that people try to ruin our existence doesn't mean that life itself is not amazing. And if we can keep our eye on the ball and recognize that quality, then at that moment nobody can make us unhappy. The Daodejing puts that into the perspective of its opposite. It is a technique that the Daodejing very often uses. And at the moment when it talks about not having desires, creates constancy, it says also that at the moment when you do have desires, then at that moment you're automatically become a reactive being. At the moment when you become a reactive being, you are becoming part of what is called Jing, which is the perceptive field of things. And at the moment when you talk about the perceptive field of things, it's like, how do you feel about it, right? You feel about things, something. And in our Western culture, feeling, of course, is everything. It's very important. We want to be validated for our feelings because our feelings are meaningful. And that is actually the trap that the Daodejing talks about, by being dragged forward by your feelings, like what we learn in our adolescence because of all the enthusiasm about games, about beautiful clothes, about boys and girls, about the punishments from our parents because we do things wrong, because of our friends who have favorites and we have favorites, and all the other things that we consider to be, well, not helpful as a Taoist. But because of these things, what you see is then at that moment you're being driven to a life of just reacting on things. Then the interdependency of things becomes a thing. And at the moment when we become interdependent with other things that are also in an emotional field, then at that moment the Jing of that perceptual field becomes a burden to us. The Daodejing completes that part by saying that both constancy and living by desire, they have the same source because they both come from you. You are the one having desires. You are the one just observing things for what they are and seeing their marvels. Or you allow yourself to be dragged along by things and therefore know unhappiness. This is very similar to what the Buddha also says when he talks about the Four Noble Truths, because he says, look, we all experience suffering and we want to escape from that suffering. And this is what you have to do. Step 1, step 2, 12 steps altogether. Taoism took many of these steps for itself also, but they have a different perspective in the sense that they think that because of just calming your feelings, for instance, by sitting still, allowing the wind and the fire of your body to sink downward by the body weight so that it can concentrate on your butt or on your feet, so that the restlessness from the body caused by winds and fire inside your body can calm down. So by just sitting in a straight chair, not leaning against the backside of your chair, but just making sure that you sit on a hard chair and you just sink your weight downward, you lower your wind and fire. If you do not lower your wind and fire the whole day through, it might very well be that you become overexcitable, but then also easily become tired. And that means that the yang of your body, which has to warm your body, then condenses in a too early stage. And instead of going all the way to the tips of your fingers and your toes, it actually condenses earlier and becomes dampness that is locked inside your body, making your body feel heavy, tired. And if combined with heat or combined with cold, causes stagnation or vomiting or dizziness or all kinds of other things, and definitely can cause overweight at a certain point in your life when it accumulates beyond a certain point, because then your body cannot reawaken that dampness anymore towards yang. And this is the reason why we do Tai Chi Chuan, or why we do Qigong, or why we also meditate, is namely to reawaken the yang by eliminating the yin. The yin in that sense is the dampness and the heaviness that is coming from our food, our drinks, and it has only a temporary value. But the yang, when properly administered and properly circulated, that actually creates a sense of permanence in our body and therefore also a sense of being alive. The funny thing is that the Tao Te Ching calls the common origin from these things mysterious, or actually it calls it dark, because it is depending on choice. Taoism is very much a fan of rationality, obvious, intellectual, clear-minded choices. And we have to enjoy the marvels of life to be able to make the right kind of choices. It is not just about choices which you think is politically smart or business-wise savvy, or this will bring you money and therefore make you feel better about yourself, because these are the desire-based thoughts. But the enjoyment of life as a whole, and therefore building yourself a healthier and longer life is therefore actually the superior choice. But for this you have to exercise, because by nature our society doesn't provide the tools to achieve that very easily. It's a discipline, and this is also why in Wudang, where I am a disciple since 1999, the name is actually Wudang. Wu means basically disciplinary, and Dang means service. That means that you're doing service both to yourself and to your fellow beings. All beings, not just your teacher, not just your family, not just to your pets, but to all beings. And that brings you into the wider society that I discussed in the earlier videos from this month. In the next part, the Daodejing basically talks about the fact that when you are cultivating yourself, you first have to realize that your being is more important than your desires, right? When you can realize your being is more important than your desires, that's one thing. But you also have to understand that there is non-being, that a part of you is into that non-being. And that means that you start experiencing a sort of unity with the marvelousness of the universe as a whole, and you can see yourself as part of it, where somewhere else in the Tao Te Ching it talks about finding Tao is not that difficult. Being unified with Tao is not that difficult. But, it is because of the way how we think that we get out of Tao, and as a result of that experience all kind of problems. But at the moment when we let go of things and we get into the right kind of understanding of what we're actually doing here, and that's quite a mystical one, I must admit, and it's a very non-materialistic one, then the duality between being and non-being is being resolved, because you are in service of reality as a whole. This is also why I like the name Wudang, from the area where I have become a Daoist. The whole verse is being concluded by the sentence that this is the doorway to all the marvelous things. And in that sense, what we talked about in the earlier part, namely being in itself has to be experienced as marvelous. This is the gateway of how to get there, is being discussed in this verse. So if you only study your whole life only this verse of the Tao Te Ching, which, to really comprehend it, and the techniques that are incorporated in there, and the methods and the approaches, if you can do that, then at that moment you are becoming quite well versed in understanding Tao. So I don't know, there's a lot more to say about these things, of course, and I could talk for days on this topic, and it is true, it is very complicated, but I think I have answered the question. And if you are a beginner in the study of the Tao Te Ching, I think this information will weaponize you against all the misconceptions in popular translations. I do advise to read as many translations as you can find, right? So try also to do in other languages. If you speak German, read also English ones. If you read English ones, also read German and French ones, and so forth and so forth. Because all these different translations are from slightly different cultures. They all have a slightly different perspectives, and that gives you a more relativistic perspective on the meaning of the translations. And there are many ways, if you never get into contact with a Taoist from close hand, and you can never ask questions directly to somebody, and you only get unprovoked questions, or unprovoked answers, I should say, from a person, an idiot like me, then at that moment, of course, you might not be able to deal with it at that moment. But at the moment when this actually fires you up and say like, oh, I actually have to study more, you're always welcome, of course, to ask me questions. It would be much better to just join the classes, because all the classes that I give, they are there to help you realize these kind of things in yourself. I make mistakes in my life. You make mistakes in your life. We do this all the time, but we're all the time trying to improve on ourselves, and that is called self-cultivation. And Tao De, in that sense, and Jing, the combination, Tao De, is the secret of that self-cultivation. If you don't do anything, then you understand Tao De, and you can apply that to your life. This is the most important part of Taoist training. And at the moment when you're doing Qigong, when you're doing energy work or something like this, you're completing the need for satisfaction of your emotions, and therefore you move away from Tao. At the moment when you do Tai Chi Chuan, and you do that to learn martial arts, however useful, because I also did do martial arts with Tai Chi Chuan, and I wasn't even bad in it. Maybe not a great master, but it is not the point of the Tai Chi Chuan. The point of the Tai Chi Chuan is as a means to control the basic functions of being and try to avoid become not so much non-being as well as death, because there's a difference between being death and non-being, because non-being is related to Tao and death is related to, well, death basically. So thank you for watching, and I hope you really enjoyed this. Sign up, join, and watch more of my videos.